Hey guys, welcome to the start of another restoration project. This time it's going to be something a little different. It is a Majestic Model 120. Certainly uncommon, perhaps bordering on rare. I got it at the Fall 2022 Early Television Museum Swap Fest. I had the privilege of perusing the museum before the Swap Fest started, and I saw this. They have some rows of sort of overflow sets that are going to be sold, sets that are going to be auctioned off to help fund the museum. And I saw this set there, and I noted it's unusual. Well, Majestic TVs it's an unusual brand, certainly known for their radios, but not so much for their TVs. But also odd construction. The front is a panel of bakelite screwed to the cabinet. The cabinet is covered with, I think they call it leatherette, like Tolex wallpaper, but it looks like leather basically. And I had to have it. It's in really good condition too. I got it for a very reasonable price. Don't know really a whole lot about it other than it looks weird, and then it's an off-brand, and weird off-brand stuff tends to be more interesting to me electrically on the insides. But something else I'm dying to do is see if that bakelite can be polished up. It may seem like a crazy place to start on a restoration project, but to me that is one of the more, or maybe the most eye-catching or appealing parts of this set is the large piece of bakelite, and it's very dull. It has some specks on it and some dirt. If we're lucky, it'll polish up really bright and shiny, and it'll really make this set pop. And then it has some brass down below, the usual VHF channels 2 through 13. We have, I presume this is power, volume, and contrast. And then there's a control door that flips down. Vertical hold brightness, horizontal hold. A little odd to hide brightness. That generally is something that you would want to access fairly often. I did find some service info. It's a little scant. I don't know if Sam's ever made a photo fact for this set. If they have, it's not scanned and available online that I could see. And the rider's info, I think I found a whopping 3 pages. So we might be a little have to do some detective work while fixing this. I may not have the luxury of having resistance and voltage charts and alignment info and all that kind of stuff. I think I've got a schematic and just a basic overview of how the set works. Alright, so buckle up. I hope it'd be an interesting project. I'm just going to start out with a little test area. I'm not going to polish the whole thing now. To do it properly, I will dismantle the front of this set. But I'm really curious to get some idea of the potential. I also want to, well, find out sooner than later, does it have UV damage? Bakelite's pretty impervious stuff to chemicals, water, time. But UV will break down the surface and dull it, sometimes permanently if it's bad enough. There are some things you can do to revive it, but best if you don't have to. If it's really bad, you can get the surface incredibly smooth. You can polish it all you want, but it just won't shine. And the colors get dull. You can use, I've heard, I haven't tried it yet, red mahogany wood stain. And then possibly clear coat it. Or certainly wax helps. You can use automotive products. And I imagine there are automotive waxes that offer UV protection. I strongly recommend give them a try or keep your stuff out of the sun. Well, I'm really digging this. This has exceeded my expectations just in less than 5 minutes of cleaning. It's looking fantastic. A little what I thought might be a scratch. Nope, just some gunk cleaned right off. I'm hoping that will follow for the rest of it, and see what a difference it is between that, like mirror-like surface, and that. It's going to look really sharp. For the rest of it, well, yeah, there are some little tears here and there. This is not my favorite surface to work with. I'm going to have to do a little reading up on how to clean and preserve this stuff. I'll probably look in the vintage guitar amp forums and see what they have to say. It's dirty. It's fraying in a few spots, so, but it's not horrible. Mostly I'd like to know, how can I safely clean it? And is there any product I can put on it to both make it look nice and help preserve it? Well, I just couldn't resist. Turns out the knobs are very easy to pull off, and then they were just 4 long screws, 1/4-inch hex head. Took them off, and the whole front just comes right off in one piece. And then we can get a look at the set from the front. It's a 12-inch pitch tube. Initially I thought this was a 10, but no, it's a 12-inch set. Steel band around it with not a whole lot of padding. I've seen that a lot. It's kind of, it seems a little disconcerting to just have a metal band directly on glass. There's a couple spots where maybe they wrapped a little electrical tape around it, but that's it. And then just tighten it down. And a couple rubber pads here that are probably rock hard. Well, anyway. Well, obviously we can't pull the chassis out of the front because of these corner blocks, so we'll have to pull it out from the back side. Anyways, while that's out, we can clean the front and clean the face of the CRT. It's probably never been cleaned since the set was made. And here's the front. There's some safety glass in here for implosion protection. Some rubber bumpers that would go against the face of the CRT, I guess. Still a little bit pliable. Let's see, how is this glass held in? Probably those, those Tinnerman nuts or whatever they're called. That's probably how all this stuff is held on. It's kind of common with bakelite. So that's the little logo at the top. At least the escutcheons around the controls are held in with screws. So if I really want to polish this, I need to take this stuff out. That'll be a little tricky. I have come to learn that there is actually a tool specifically designed for releasing these. That's a very tiny one. These are sort of little bits of spring steel that have teeth in them. You push them down and then they kind of don't want to come off. I know there are some tricks for doing it, but still it's a pain in the butt to get them off, no matter what I've found. I did end up pretty much polishing the whole thing. There's a few nooks and crannies I still need to get into, but I did clean all this, and I did get these escutcheons off, and I polished them. I was really on the fence about doing it, and I don't think I would have, except that about a third of this one was corroded. These originally had some type of treatment to give them a nice uniform sort of brownish color, and then they probably had a lacquer clear coat. That coating deteriorated on this, and it was green with brass corrosion. So it was either just leave them all exactly as they were, which there's certainly a valid argument to be made for just leaving things alone, or if I was going to polish up one, I had to polish up all of them to get them all uniform looking, which is what I ended up doing. However, I would like to figure out how to chemically treat them to get a reasonable approximation of what they were originally. See, antique radios, TVs, it would be unusual for them to have a whole bunch of really highly polished brass like this. It was very commonly chemically treated to darken it, to make it brownish, blackish, darkish looking. And I'm not talking about antiquing necessarily, where it looks kind of splotchy, like I've heard people use ammonia vapor or liver of sulfur. But now I'm talking almost looking more like paint. But it wasn't paint. And there's one issue with them being highly polished is there's very visible grain in this brass. It doesn't look that, from a distance it looks fine, up close it doesn't look that good. And those aren't scratches, that's actually, the more you polish it, they just become more noticeable, I think. That's actually the metal itself. So I'll have to get some scrap brass, and I found all kinds of suggestions and processes online for aging and antiquing brass. A lot of the results I saw, they look kind of splotchy. So we'll see. If I can't, fine, I'll just clear coat these and leave them bright and shiny. But I would like to get that original, what I presume is the original look back, if I can. And actually, there's a fine example of that. I just noticed this Filco radio my sister got for me a while ago. Similar deal. That is a brass escutcheon, but it's actually been treated. It may have even been painted. They just used brass, I think, because it was a good workable metal, but they didn't want it to be really bright and shiny, so they coat it with something to make it dull looking. That really is how they were originally. Not everything was meant to be bright and shiny. Now you might be thinking, hey, polishing up the brass is one thing, but the bakelite, isn't this going to be distracting and shiny and reflective? Keep in mind, you would typically watch these in a dim room, and the only light really is going to be coming from the face of the CRT. So light's going to be coming out of it. It's not going to be hitting this and reflecting back at you. So I really don't think that's an issue. Alright, now let's take a look inside. Well, it's a little different from what I'm used to seeing. For example, I don't know what that is. I'm guessing the flyback might be under that, because I can see the high voltage lead, high voltage anode coming off the CRT going to a hole in the chassis. Just kind of an odd little metal box protruding from the chassis. We have a brightener on the CRT, 12LP4A according to the tube chart. I could dig up a replacement if need be, but I'm really curious. I have seen sets with brighteners and the pitch tube was just fine. My theory being, back in the day, a serviceman would come out for a call, say the complaint being the picture was dim, slap on a brightener, charge him, and be on his way without doing any troubleshooting whatsoever. Could be an issue with the high voltage being low. Could be an issue with the brightness control not being in the right range. So we shall see. There's one tube sunk down into the chassis, and I see Majestic on it, so that's likely an original tube. There's a big old rectifier, 5U4. Tube charts. And a label I found when I took the back off. It fell off. It had been on the back of the chassis down here. Just saying that they're using some patents. I have a serial number. No, I don't know. They made 493,817 of these. More likely they made. You know, production values or numbers are so hard to come by. Say the set is from 49. I think all makes, all models combined, it's something like under 2 million sets were made. It's really hard to get numbers from the early days. I know by the early 50s they were making over 10 million a year, cheaper in the early days. Like I think in 47 they made 180,000 TVs combined, all makes, all models. That's why when you find sets from 46, 47, they're all uncommon. They didn't make a lot of any of them. I'll put it this way, the most common TV, the VT71 family, all makes, all models that use that TS4 chassis, they made about 100,000 of them. And that was by far the most common TV. Anyways, I digress. That's curious off the anode lead. I wonder if that's... Okay, so there is a support wire. Not a bad idea. Meaning that if that anode cap detached from the CRT, there would be a little brace to hold it so it wouldn't hit the chassis. Like a little kickstand on it. Curious chassis. The front of it kind of... It doesn't go all the way to the front of the cabinet. Or there's a cutout on top. I suppose partly to accommodate the picture tube. And partly, so they could put a tuner on that side. On this side we can see a peek at the controls. Oh boy, it's going to be a weird one. We have some corrosion. Looks like some of it may have been because of the labels that were... Or no, the label was here, sorry. I don't know why it's got spotty corrosion on the side. I wonder if this plastic insulation might have leached out and caused pitting in those areas. Well, there's some there too. I don't know. It's a little odd to see corrosion on a vertical surface. Horizontal sure makes sense. Maybe something splashed onto it, who knows. I just hope it wasn't a mouse house at some point. I see light surface corrosion all over, but not terrible. Sheet of metal of some sort on this side, shielding maybe. Seems like the horizontal stuff is on this side of the chassis. Speaking of, conspicuously absent is a horizontal output tube. Well, I was looking at the service info for this, and I think this may be one that uses a tube I've never encountered in a set. I have a bunch of spares, but never in a set. And I think it's a 6AV5 or something like that. 6W4. So it's a damper tube. Yeah, 6AV5. So this is the horizontal output tube. So no cap on top. That became far more common later on, but for a set from the late 40s, that's unusual. They pretty much all used the 6BG6 or something in that family. And even into the 50s, into the 60s, there are plenty of horizontal output tubes with a plate cap on top. But this one, no. So, interesting. That's what drew me to this set. I knew it was going to be a little different inside. Alright, so what I want to do now is, let's see if this picture tube is really dead, or can we squeeze some life out of it. And check out this brightener. If it is a brightener, they call it, well, it's a Gemco Ellenbogen refractor, model 23. Great Eastern Manufacturing Company, Brooklyn, New York. So what is a refractor? I don't know. Or maybe it's an Ellenbogen refractor. That just sounds silly and made up. There are some of these that do not boost the filament voltage. They are there in case there's a heater to cathode short, and it's just an isolation transformer 1-to-1, and it does not boost the filament voltage. Those are rare. So it's very likely it is a booster. I just thought that was pretty amusing. Now here's something interesting. I hooked up the CRT tester and I got filament glow. So I grabbed my multimeter, figuring I'd probably have an open filament. And sure enough, one I put in resistance mode and one across these pins. Trying to get this on camera for you guys. It's measuring open. But when I took my meter probes and stuck them into the ends, I get 1.7 ohms. So what does that mean? These are hollow, and the leads from the CRT come out to the ends, and they put a blob of solder on the end. It means that that solder joint has failed. So maybe that brightener was an attempt to get it going again, and they gave up on it. I don't know. Or maybe that brightener led to the problem. But I'm going to grab a soldering iron and touch up those pins and see if we can restore continuity. Alright, well that restored filament continuity, and it is glowing, but boy, this is one dead CRT. I've had it running 7 volts, even went so high as 8.4, and just not getting much of anything. There's like one tick on the emissions. If I go to 8.4, I get maybe 3 or 4 ticks on the meter. Cutoff control does respond, which means all the elements, all the pins are connecting, basically. And this G2 light never lights up. So, I've had it running for half an hour now, and there's just no signs of improvement. So, what I want to try doing is rejuvenate. Really have nothing to lose at this point. But I'm not going to do it with this. I'm going to do it with my second core, so I'm going to get that out now. It has more advanced rejuvenation capabilities than this guy does. I'm getting ready to pull the chassis, and one thing I wanted to make note of is how it's all put together. One thing that's rather odd is there's no AC interconnect down here. It's up at the top of the cabinet, and the AC line runs down around. So if I was to just undo this chassis and try to pull it, wires would rip out of that. So need to undo those 2 screws, and it's probably no coincidence that the 2 screws don't match, because I'm sure that was taken out back ages ago. Let's see. Hey, the speaker plugs in. That's always a nice touch, so I don't have to worry about that. I've already pulled the knobs and actually taken the whole front of the set off. Power cord isn't stapled, so yeah, I think all I have to do is take those 2 screws out, and I think there's 4 screws underneath, and then we can pull it out. Turns out there were 6 screws holding the chassis in, and what's really remarkable is not only are all 6 screws present, they match. For those of you who haven't worked on vintage electronics, that's unusual, because these things were made to be serviced, and serviced they were if they saw any use. Every time they were serviced, all 6 screws had to come out. They would get lost, misplaced, forgotten to put back in. So that's a good sign. So it may mean it's never been serviced, other than some tubes being changed. Let's find out. I know you want to see the chassis, but let's take a look at the inside of the cabinet for a moment while we're here. Not the best made cabinet I've seen. It's basically a plywood box. It does have a built-in loop antenna though. Was not connected. Generally those don't work all that great unless you're in a strong broadcast area. Unfortunately, they used some perforated pegboard masonite for the bottom, which I've never seen before, and it got caved in. Who knows, set on top of something, or I can finagle it back down, I imagine, and maybe glue it back up. But I've never seen that before. I've seen perforated metal bottoms, but never a perforated pegboard bottom before. which is especially odd because I believe there's a metal plate underneath the chassis. Alrighty, here it is. It's actually a pretty beefy chassis for what's kind of a budget set. Let's see. It does have UL on the back. I assume that means it's UL listed. Oh, high vacuum pitcher tube is dangerous to handle. Blah, blah, blah. Qualified service personnel. That would be me. Let's see. Line inspect R, preliminary inspection, final inspection. Well, it was inspected. I did read in the service info there should be a 1/4 amp fuse, pigtail fuse for the flyback underneath this. So that's a little high voltage generator. The flyback is underneath that cover. I'm curious to pop that off. Surface corrosion, yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see what we can do about that. All right, I know you want to see what's underneath, but so I'll keep you in suspenders for a little bit longer here. I plan on starting to work on my less common sets in between the Predictas, but I'm going to be doing a little bit different approach to my usual completely tear it apart and rebuild everything like I've been doing with the Predictas and Motorola's and Admirals, because I can get spare parts for those. I have parts chassis. I have a lot of experience with them, and so do plenty of others. Something like this, there aren't many of these around. It's the only one I've ever seen. So I do plan on getting it working, but I am not going to tear it apart and strip the rust off the chassis and just gut the thing and start recapping everything. I'm going to do a less is more approach with these rarer sets like this and the Bendix I got recently, meaning we're going to do as little as possible to get it working. So I'm not going to be tearing this apart and soaking the chassis in rust remover or anything like that. Alright, without further ado, let's tip this thing over. And we don't get to see much. I'll have to wait a little longer, but let's see what we can. Filter caps are up here, which is unusual. Kind of reminds me of Stromberg Carlson TC10, which I do have, and I'll get to one of these days. That's why I'm curious about these oddball sets. Is they're built different. I can just see from these terminal strips already. This thing looks like it's homemade. Let's see. See how many wires are on this. It's probably the vertical output transformer. And that, of course, is the tuner. But boy, it sure is clean underneath. All the screws are present rather, which is another good indicator it's not been worked on. So let me get those off. I don't expect to ever see one again, and you probably never will either. So I'm going to take my time. Also, probably I would have a very, very difficult time finding replacement parts if I was to hastily damage the flyback or something. And wow, that's very, very, very different from any TV I've ever worked on before. Well, by that I mean that I've looked at the schematic already. It's pretty similar. There's a few differences here and there to other sets I've worked on, but the construction sure is different. Geez. So you see the terminal strips earlier. I thought there'd be more. I'm not sure how this is all wired. Well, it looks like it's point-to-point wiring going between the tube sockets, and there are very few terminal strips. There's one here. All these parts are just globbed right on to all the pins on the tube sockets. It's going to make working on it a bit of a challenge. So, power transformer, rectifier tube, filter caps are way the heck over here. One of these, well, it uses the focus coil as a filter choke. We have 4 big transformers. Okay, one of them will be vertical output. One of them is probably a vertical blocking transformer. Audio output transformer. What's the 4th one? Maybe there isn't a filter choke in addition to the field coil. And of course, it's the flyback, which I thought would be smaller and more recessed underneath that cover. So it looks like that cover. Oh, the rectifier tube is underneath that cover. And that's about it. The flyback is just hanging out here. Unshielded, unprotected from anything. And inside the cabinet, they had a shield here. There's like a piece of aluminum foil stuck to the inside of the cabinet. Seems a little odd given how we have all this metal and then a metal on the bottom. Why do you need an additional sheet of metal next to a piece of metal? I don't know, but it was there. Oh man. So has it been worked on before? At first blush, I'd say no. If it has, maybe just 1 or 2 caps were clipped out and replaced. It's so hard to say because the caps are a real hodgepodge. By that I mean we've got a red plastic tubular one here, we've got a white, maybe ceramic or plastic tubular one here, we've got a black one, we've got some paper dipped in beeswax. More commonly, bigger manufacturers, they source all their parts from the same place and they all kind of look the same. They may even be branded with the manufacturer's name, but no, definitely not in this case. Well, it's going to be interesting. So as far as service info goes, there is a Sam's folder, but I don't have it. I have the chassis up on top of the workbench now, and I'm taking a closer look at things on this side of the chassis. One thing I was curious about is the 6AV5. So this is, I think, the first horizontal output tube to not have a plate cap on top. It was introduced in 1949, and this is probably one of the first sets to use it. The reason they have a plate cap on top is there's some pretty nasty voltage spikes going to that tube. So how can they get away with putting it in an octal tube? Well, I suspect that pin that has no pin to either side is the plate. And if you notice, this socket is different from the 6SN7 or 6W4 to either side. So I suspect this is a higher grade socket. Someone online suggested maybe they use a ceramic. No, but this is probably a higher grade of plastic. Maybe it has ground up mica in it or something like that to boost its insulation properties to withstand that pulse. Another thing I find a little curious is I went through my stash in case I need a replacement, and I found a few other 6AV5s, but they're all fatter. They're still an octal base, but they're larger in diameter and they're a little bit taller. And this tube was introduced in 1949. This is probably one of the first sets to ever use it. And this is a GT type. I can't tell if it's the original or not. Well, no, it is Majestic. I hadn't noticed that. So yeah, this could very well be the original tube. So I wonder if they realize later on that maybe they need to make the tube a little bit beefier. Or maybe it's, I have A or B versions that have better specs. I don't know. What else? I was curious about what the heck is under this. Well, it's this cute little hinged lid here, made out of aluminum, so it's not corroded like the rest of the top side. There is our high voltage rectifier. Unlike just about everything you've ever seen me work on, it doesn't use a 1B3. It uses a 1X2, which is a smaller tube, 9-pin base. And really a 1B3 is overkill for most of this stuff. or probably everything that I've ever worked on, because they're rated up to something like 25 or 30,000 volts. These sets run on 8, 9, 10,000 volts, so you can get away with a more modest tube. And there is a pigtail fuse, as they mention here, so it is a fused set. Not only on the flyback, but there's also a fuse on the power coming in, which is an unusual feature for a set this early. And finally, the high voltage 500 picofarad ceramic filter cap for the high voltage is right underneath that screw. There's our high voltage lead with a little kickstand there. I wasn't sure if that was original or not until I saw a photo online of, or maybe it was in the rider service info. Well, I saw another chassis that had that same thing, and there's a screw for it. So yeah, that is original. One final thing of note is that nasty looking resistor. Next to it is a rather large looking potentiometer. Those two are part of the focus circuit. They control how much current goes to this focus electromagnet that effectively squeezes the electron beam coming out of this gun to focus it on the front of the CRT. That resistor is probably toast, and I need to replace it before I can think about powering the setup. Something else a little unusual looking is the ion trap magnet. This is a 12LP4. I've seen some that use dual magnets. This only uses a single, which I've also seen. I find that kind of curious that you could get away with using either type on the same type of CRT. Regardless, they both do the same thing. They bend the electron beam back towards the face of the CRT. But what's curious about it, not just that it's a single magnet, is that the way it's constructed, it's rather crude looking. Just a bar magnet and a metal holder with brass or copper strips on either side just snapping onto the glass with no cushioning or anything like that. I make note of it because this picture tube is essentially dead, and I'm going to need to remove it. And in order to remove it, I have to take that off. So we'll have to deal with that. This looks like there might be some kind of shims in there, or maybe that's some padding. See this, the yoke, and especially the focus electromagnet, they can move. That's how you do your centering. And you don't want that to smack into the glass, so it's not a bad idea to have a little cushioning between this and the glass. Alright, so where do we go from here? Well, I think I have most of the parts I would need. The electrolytics are all pretty common values, as are the paper caps. The only thing I might need to special order is that power resistor, but I could probably bodge something together that's close enough with what I have. So I would like to try powering this up. And I'm inclined to try reforming the caps and just see what we get with it as is. Because I have a Variac that has, I can monitor the current flow out of it. It has a fuse and a circuit breaker. This has a fuse. So as long as we closely monitor everything and put a meter on the B+ and all that, we should be pretty safe. I certainly wouldn't walk away from it while it's under power. And then I'd like to just replace parts one at a time. It's a rare set and I don't want to screw anything up, so I'd like to do it methodically. Thought about restuffing, but because most of the caps are plastic and they're just a variety of brands, if they were also Majestic on them and were really nice looking, I'd be more inclined to. I can certainly save the parts I clip out. I take tons of reference photos, but I think I will just be tacking new parts in place, and there really aren't that many. So, I think I'll leave off here while I assemble the parts I need. And, of course, I'm still working on Predictas. There's a Predicta chassis right behind it. I was just curious to pull this out, especially and see what I had to work with, see if it was restorable, see if there were any damaged parts I might need to track down. So I'm going to clear this back off and get back to a Predicta, but soon, when I've got a little bit of time, I think I'll try powering this up. So I'll be looking for that in the near future. Hope you enjoyed this look at a rather uncommon Majestic Model 120 from 1949.